knows that a person can get lost in little things and lose sight of the big things. If you think you have to win every battle, you can that way lose the war. Sometimes sacrifices have to be made. And sometimes the sacrifices are crucial to winning the war. It's not just that in spite of the sacrifices you may be able to win the war, but it may be that through the very sacrifices themselves, the losses themselves, the war is won. For example, suppose I don't know where my opponent is strongest. So I might try 3 different attacks to see what kind of response I get. Now, I can't afford to give 3 full-scale attacks. So I'll give 3 small attacks. One of them is going to be wiped out because that small attack is going to hit him where he's strongest and it's going to be wiped out. But then I'll know that that's where he's strongest. The other 2 attacks may fight to a standstill. But then once I know where he's strongest, then I know where to concentrate my forces. So I do that knowing I'm going to lose 1 attack. But that's the only way to get the information. Another type of case is where the ultimate victory depends upon the cooperation of the other person. How am I going to get him to cooperate? If we have a series of interactions, if they are competitive, if we're fighting over something, if I win every preliminary interaction, he may simply lose interest. Or he may feel that I'm not dealing fairly with him. And he may discontinue. In which case I've lost the war. I won the battles, but I lost the war. Same thing's true with myself. I want to make progress in something. It would be wonderful if I lay out a method, a strategy, and I take my steps, and every step succeeds and leads to a final victory. But here too, I may not know my own strengths. I may not know my own best strategy. I may have to test. Testing means sometimes saying, okay, I may very well lose. I'm going in order to lose, because that way I'll know whether that was a real strength that I have or not a real strength that I have. It's gaining self-knowledge. The same thing's true with learning to trust yourself. If you aren't willing to learn from mistakes, if you protect yourself against the feeling of failure, if you always try to justify why you were right, then deep down, you know that you have no reason to trust yourself. No reason to trust. You can always defend yourself against critique, but you have no reason to trust yourself because you yourself don't know what's going to happen. You can't predict what will happen. So you know you don't really grasp the reality. Only someone who's willing to learn from when he tries something, what happens. And that includes acknowledging that I tried something and it didn't work, it was a mistake, I have to try something different. Only such a person eventually will have the real confidence that what he's doing is correct. Now, you have psukim and chazal which indicate this idea, and we say them in a way of reassuring ourselves that we're okay, but I don't think we take them seriously enough. Sheva yipol tzadik v'kam. The tzaddik falls down 7 times and gets up. So, one thought is, even if you fall down, not good to fall down, it's terrible to fall down, but even if you fall down, you should know you can still get up. The tzaddik still gets up. That's true, but I don't think that it's the full message. The pasuk doesn't say, even if the tzaddik falls 7 times, he gets up. The pasuk says that tzaddik falls 7 times, and he gets up. To a certain extent, that's essential to becoming a tzaddik. Falling and getting up. Without that, you're not going to be a tzaddik. Chazal say, "Ein adam omed of the Torah elam kein nichshal b'hem." A person does not get mastery of a Torah idea Torah subject unless he's tripped up by that subject. That means he fails. You will not have mastery unless you failed. Part of getting mastery over a Torah subject is thinking about it and analyzing it and trying to understand it, and then putting it forward and having it examined and criticized by others, and finding out that you made a mistake and trying again. That's an essential feature in mastering a Torah subject. Now, what is the gift in these failures? One gift in the failures, from a Torah point of view, this is absolutely crucial. One gift in these failures is to acknowledge that I can't do it on my own. When I fail, that teaches me the extent of my abilities. If I fail repeatedly, at a certain point I have to say, well, then I can't do it. But I can't do it doesn't mean I retreat and just quit. I say, Ribono Shel Olam, if you want me to succeed, you have to help me, because I can't do it alone. And that may be the key. Surrendering myself to HaKadosh Baruch Hu may be the key of getting divine assistance, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants me to succeed, knowing that it's success due to a partnership. He doesn't want me to have the false idea that I did it on my own. We have a pasuk that's the foundation of a great deal of Jewish thinking. My strength and the power of my hands made for me all the success. That's spiritual poison. That's spiritual poison. How do you avoid that? One way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu enables you to avoid it is from time to time letting you see that the success did not come from the power of your hand. So that means you make your effort fails, and there's a success. But then you know that it wasn't your effort that did it. I'll give you an example. The first shabbaton that Rasamelech made in the United States, and I was privileged to be there, the person running the shabbaton advertised people should come. And we had a reasonable number of people, maybe 25. Afterwards, he handed out a survey. Those days it was done pen and paper. You can read about that in history books. And he asked, where did you hear about this program? Not a single one heard of it through his advertising. Not one. He said to me, do you think that my advertising was unnecessary? It was worthless? I said, not at all, for two reasons. Number one, we have an obligation of hishtadlus. We have to do effort. We have to make an effort to try to bring about the results that we want. So number two, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us a success, and he gave us a secondary gift that he showed us that the success did not come from the hishtadlus. That means he let us see that it was his contribution that made the success. That's a great success. Now that means the advertising had to fail to learn that and to see that. Without that failure, that lesson wouldn't have been provided. Because Baruch Hu wouldn't have been able to give us that lesson. So one of the reasons why failure may be the key ultimately to success is because it causes a person to think, I didn't do it, I can't do it, and to daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for help. Because ultimately, although you do have to do hishtadlus, the outcome is always HaKadosh Baruch Hu's gift to you. I think that this is part of same gilui, same revelation, is part of almost everyone, maybe everyone's intellectual life. You come across a problem and you think about it, how to understand the tesis, or how to solve a problem in a relationship, or whatever it is. You think about it and get no answers. So you try tricks that you've learned from experience. Think about it backwards. Wait till tomorrow, and let us sleep on it overnight. Ask friends. Start reading at random. Let your mind free associate. Nothing comes. Nothing comes. What do you do when you try all your strategies and nothing comes? Some people go through all the strategies again. The strategies didn't yield anything. Experience teaches some people that if you go through all the strategies again, even though they didn't work last time, they'll work next time, or a third time, or a fourth time. Now, why should that be? If you're building something with Legos, and you put them together, and then you don't have enough pieces, or it ends up twisted like a pretzel, or it falls apart, you don't build it the same way again, because you're going to get the same result again. Why would you go through the same processes that you went through before, when every time you use those processes, you got a failure? The answer is that experience teaches that sometimes, inexplicably, it works. It works. Now, what does that mean? It works. How can it work when it didn't work? The same it. So people who are spiritually dumb, or who can't afford to allow a foreign idea into their minds, talk about, well, there must have been some differences that I couldn't tell. Some minute differences in the way I did it, or maybe there was something that had to be tripped in my mind, maybe, without any evidence whatsoever. The spiritually aware person says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is giving me this double favor, just like my friend said at the shabbaton. He's giving me this double favor. Number one, he gives me the result. But number two, he shows me that it wasn't my process that produced the result. It wasn't. He showed me that it was a gift. Now, in English, we recognize this. Well, how do we say when we say the idea hit me? What a funny way to talk. The idea hit me. It's an idea thing that can walk up and hit you, but it pictures the idea as something external to you that comes. It came to me. It came to me. What was it? 7 miles distance? 100 miles distance to take a jet plane? But we speak about it as something external that comes to me because I can't honestly say that I built it, that I made it. I know the workings of my mind. I know what I tried to do. I know that they failed so many times. So I can't see it as my production. That means I'm getting a vision of the truth. It really isn't my production. But it's the very failure to be able to build it that creates in me that consciousness that it wasn't I that built it. This means that a certain measure of ruchnius, of spirituality, is built on failure. Without those failures, it's impossible to assess them, to achieve them. Same thing's true with humility, with anava. Humility is built on the sense of my own limitations. Now here it's a little bit more subtle. Some people think humility means I'm nothing. I am nothing. I'm a zero. And there may be some sources that teach it that way. Ramchal does not agree with that definition. In Mesilas Yesharim, Ramchal defines humility as I don't deserve credit for my great qualities. Pride is I do deserve credit for my great qualities. Humility is I don't deserve credit for my great qualities. Great qualities I have. The question is whether I deserve credit for them or not. The person who thinks that he's zero, according to Ramchal, isn't in the ballpark of humility and pride. And I would go further and say that he's making a terrible mistake. Because, as the child's motto has it, God don't make junk. When God makes something, it's got to be valuable. It has to have great qualities. Okay, so the goal, like Moses was the most humble man on the face of the earth. How did he manage that? Who had more outstanding qualities than Moses? Nobody. So how could he be humble? Did he have to lie to himself? Did he have to say, I'm really nothing, nobody? I have no qualities? It'd be crazy. No. What he has to say to himself is, I don't deserve credit for my greatness. Now, why not? How do I learn that I don't deserve credit for my greatness? Now, sometimes there are obvious divine gifts. A person with a photographic memory. He hasn't tried, doesn't make any effort, just remembers everything that he sees. So he knows that that's a divine gift. But what about cases where I work on myself? I work on myself and I make progress and I do grow and I do develop. There, I could be tempted to think, yes, I have these spiritual qualities because I worked on them and I made them. And that's how I got them. Now, to be humble means I don't deserve credit for them. If I don't deserve credit, it means I didn't make them for myself. Otherwise, I do deserve credit. How can I be sure? How can I be taught? How can it be shown to me that I don't deserve credit for the great qualities that I have, the ones that I worked on? Answer. Sometimes when you work and nothing happens. If you work sometimes and nothing happens, you work sometimes and it's an utter failure, then you say, well, there are serious limitations on what I can produce with my work. It's the very failure that teaches you that your efforts have those limitations. So then, keeping your perspective of where the successes come from is built on failure. If you don't have those failures, you won't have that perspective. I remember when I first came to our Sameach, the statement, it isn't exactly like this in Chazal, but everybody quotes it this way, just saying that for the record. Kadosh Baruch Hu says to a human being, Pischu li peschach, kechudo shel machar, ani eftach lechem pesach kepischo shel ulam. You open for me a hole the size of the eye of a needle, I'll open to you the entranceway to a great hall. So I asked Rabbi Moshe Pindris, one of my colleagues here, I understand why God is sort of playing cat and mouse with us. If we need to go through the entranceway to a great hall, give us the power to open up an entranceway to a great hall. No. You open up and I have a needle. And I'll then open up the entranceway to the great hall. Why do it that way? He said to me, attributing success to my own efforts is not only a problem in Gashmias, in the physical world, it's a problem in Ruchnius also. It's a problem in spirituality also. You should not take credit for the success even in spiritual matters. And it's easy to imagine a person who's very pious and say, listen, money and reputation and power, they're worthless anyhow. If I put my efforts in, why should I want to take credit for achieving that? It's not worth achieving. Easy for me to say it's a divine gift. But spiritual goals, that's my avoda, that's my service. That's what I'm supposed to be accomplishing in the world. And Kadosh Baruch Hu put me in this world in order that I should be able to earn it. So then I should know that I'm the one who's producing it. That's for a high person, for a noble person, that's a terrible trap. So Kadosh Baruch Hu gives us this ability to see that it isn't our efforts that do it, because oftentimes enough, our efforts fail. When our efforts fail, then we know that our efforts didn't do it. What shall I say? In these cases, my efforts obviously failed. In this case, my efforts were successful. That's possible, but it's also quite reasonable to say that my efforts don't have the power to do it. And where a success followed my efforts, is because Kadosh Baruch Hu wanted my efforts to have an outcome, and He gave me the outcome, not that I did it on my own. So in these respects, failure is a crucial element in retaining your ruchniistic balance, your spiritual balance and perspective. Without it, you're not going to be able to succeed. Have we got it so far? It's clear? Now, this is certainly true in interpersonal relations as well. This has to do with family and friends, people you meet, especially a person who's new to Torah observance, and he's excited, and he's inspired, and he's thrilled with it, on the one side, or secretly, subconsciously, he's a little bit nervous, and he isn't really filled with deep self-confidence. So people around him who disagree with him make him nervous. Such a person will be motivated to preach to everyone, prove to everyone that he's right, get everybody to agree with him, either for the good side or for the less good side. That's a sure way to prevent communication, to prevent trust, to prevent sharing. Because, number one, the person who's newly observant is expected to be a raving fanatic. That's the way people expect him to be. And when he comes in proving that the Torah is from Sinai and the Jewish people is eternal and so forth and so on, he just reinforces that expectation. We now know that he's a raving fanatic. Look at the way he's behaving. And that cancels all communication. And you can't be very subtle about it by buying a book and leaving it on the coffee table, where they might see it. And they come to get coffee. I didn't say anything. I just put it there. They're not stupid. They're subtle enough to realize that you're doing that. And if they're clever, they'll say, you know why he's doing that? He's doing that because he himself isn't really convinced. He's not really convinced. And it puts him under pressure to be around people who disagree with him. And that means that he himself doesn't have a solid basis. When challenged, Often enough, someone says, what? You believe in the Torah? Well, philosophy showed that that was wrong. Or Freud said that that's psychologically sick. Or we all know that the communists exploded that. Often, the right response is to say, that's interesting. That's interesting. Thank you for sharing how you feel. And leave it. Don't enter the contest. Don't enter the debate. Don't answer the invitation to fight. One thing that you communicate by doing that is, I'm not under threat. I'm not under threat. Suppose someone came in and said, 2 + 2 is 5. What would you do? Would you answer him? Would you debate with him? I think you'd say, look, no communication here. There's no one there to talk to. So, have a nice day. That's all. Person who makes groundless assertions, parroting what he's read in the new atheist literature without understanding it, without having any information on the religious side, and he's sure he's right, there's no discussion there. There's no debate there. There's no argument there. So let it go. Then you project an attitude of self-confidence, calm, not under pressure, and you could show polite interest, and you could thank the person for expressing himself, and leave it at that. Or you can probe. Here's a way to probe. Wow, those are interesting ideas. I happen to know of someone who has a website, and he deals with things like that. Let me give you the website, and try it out there and see what happens. And let me know. I can give you good odds. 9 times out of 10, you give him the website, he'll never look it up. And the next time you see him, you say to him, oh, what about that website I gave you? Did you look up that website? What did they say? What did you find out over there? If he's just attacking you out of being aggressive, that will kill it without any confrontation, without any arguing, without any anger, because he's not open to a discussion or an exchange of views. If he does see the website and he does have things to say, fine, then you can offer to, the two of you write to whoever has the website and go back and forth. But that way, you're letting him take the first prize. He presented his argument and he proved you were wrong and you didn't give him an answer. Yes, give him that will. Lose that battle for the possibility of winning the war. Winning that battle, even winning it in your, especially when winning it in your own mind, he won't admit that you won, will just cancel your ability to have any effect on him. So one has to count one's opportunities and not be looking every time to win the battle. There's another application I want to mention. I learned this too late in life. Everyone makes mistakes in raising children, and we are not. I'm no different from anybody else. You see children growing up, and you see that they have opportunities to learn things, opportunities to go on trips that will be very developmental and educational for them. It's a shame for a child to lose an opportunity like that. Now, the child does something wrong, violates a rule at home, a rule at school, loses money, breaks something, doesn't have money to pay for the trip. There are really two competing considerations here. I always thought, yeah, but it's a trip to a science museum. How can I tell him not to go on that? How can I deprive him of that? I'll think of something else. It's also important to learn from experience, to learn from the consequences of your own actions. Yes, you broke that. You have to pay for it. And if you don't have money left to go to the trip to the science museum, then you won't go. He lost a trip to a science museum and he lost an opportunity to learn valuable things. Yes, he did. He also learned that your actions can cost you. Your own actions can cost you. That's a very valuable life lesson. Over a lifetime, that may be more valuable than the trip to the Science Museum. My father, Olav Shalom, taught me a similar lesson, for which I'm ever grateful. When I was a child, I was a member of a Boy Scout troop, And I had certain qualifications, so that a friend of mine, the father who was running the troop, put his son above us, even though his son did not have the qualifications that we did, and put him in charge of our subgroup. I said to my father, it's not fair. He had no right to put his son above us when we have superior qualifications. My father said to me, you're right. You're right. And if you want me to, I'll transfer you to another troop. But I think it would be good if you stay there anyway. He didn't explain why. Maybe at that age I wouldn't have been able to understand him. He just told me, I think it would be good for you if you stayed there. It wasn't my normal nature to just take what I was told. But something about my father's attitude convinced me that I would do it. And I stayed it out the year. As I grew up, I saw many cases where people were treated unfairly. And some people were broken by that. It's not right. It's not fair. It's not just. I don't have to put up with that. And then they lost out on certain things. And other people who were willing to put up with being treated unjustly, who had that strength of saying, yes, it's unjust. It's not fair. It's not right, but I have my eye on the ultimate goal. I have to put up with this in order to get to the ultimate goal. So when I went to Hopkins, and I had a colleague there, he did his PhD at the University of Michigan. He was writing his thesis. Usually you have a 3-man committee that's going to judge it, and there's one person who works with you personally. One of the 3 moved to another university. Someone from another university moved into the University of Michigan and took over his place and didn't like the content of the thesis. And he said, I don't like this, this, and this. You have to rewrite all of that. Now, that wasn't right. You don't come in the middle of a thesis and impose your standards on the student. You say, you've been working with 3 people, 3 competent people. This is the direction in which they went. I could put in minor comments here and there, but I'm not going to change the direction of the whole thesis. It was totally unfair, and it cost his student another year, an extra year to get his PhD. Had he insisted that it was unfair, he would have ended up without the PhD. But he didn't do that. He said, okay, it's an unfair thing, but I'm going to live with it because I want the PhD at the end. Now, life has in it things that are unfair. School can be unfair. Jobs can be unfair. Marriage can be unfair. Will you be broken by that? Will you be broken by that? Or will you be able to take it and live with it and get to the final goal? My father, Al-Sham, taught me that. He taught me to live with something that's unfair, that's unjust, wrong. That's a failure in terms of what I think is right, what I think is valuable. It's a failure in terms of not developing my abilities because I was put under somebody inferior to me. But that was so valuable to me. So sometimes the failures build in abilities. I also ran track in high school. And one season I developed something called Shin Splints. That's where the skin becomes very thin over the shin and the nerve is exposed to the shin, and running is excruciatingly painful. I did it because I trained in the winter. I did it in the wrong way because of what to do. So I think it was my father and the head of the track team and everything else said I should be there, be for all the practices, and walk. Walk! I can't run, I'll walk. What's the good of walking and you can't compete in the races? I came every day, I dressed up in the uniform, and I went out there and I walked. What did it produce? It produced a sense that you do what you can. You do what you can. Even if you can't see that it's helping, you do what you can. That also stood me in good stead in life. So sometimes things that look like conditions of failure can build midos, character, which becomes crucial later in life. The key to all of these examples is taking the long view. And the difficulty, the challenge is that it's very difficult to take the long view unless you're old, unless you've seen a lot. Because if you're not old, how do you know what the long view is? How do you know what this will do 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now? And that's why it's crucial to have an advisor what we call a Rabbi, what Lahavdil, the Glacier world calls a life coach, because these are people who have had experience in watching the lives of other people develop, and they're old enough and they've seen enough examples to say, you, in your circumstances, if you take this and this course, you'll have these and these results in 5 or 10 or 15 years. And if you take that course, you'll have those and those results in 5, 10, 15 years. The crucial way that you have to analyze whether this battle is worth working on and winning or worth losing because the loss will contribute to a greater success later is being able to see that far into the future. And only when you have an advisor who's able to do that can you have the advantage of that kind of foresight. It's crucial not to be caught up in the small battle, the immediate battle, the challenge of exerting your will and asserting yourself and taking control of this particular situation. Because in the long term, that may be the less productive path. That's basically what I wanted to communicate with this idea. Losing battles but winning wars. Do you have any questions?
Yes, like this is sort of like a offshoot, like you said, like a person could see that different choices could affect later on. Let's say a good choice for him now might make a challenge for later on. So that's, or that's maybe not a challenge, but it might make things easier for later on. But the best thing for him to do, if he does this, it will help him do X, help his children for X later on. Let's say get it, but if he does Y, which is best for him now, which is best for him, better than X, so then it's better for him.
See, the way you're putting the question, I'm going to repeat it for the recording. The way you're putting the question, I think, is already, in a certain sense, prejudiced. You're talking about the difference between doing something which is best for me versus doing something which isn't best for me, but might be good for my children later on. Mm-hmm. But you see, that way of putting it assumes that what's good later on for my children isn't good for me. Mm-hmm. But why not? Don't I identify with my children? Don't I want my children? Don't I want my children to be successful? So when my children are successful, isn't that something for me? Mm-hmm. The pasuk says, when Yaakov says, I'm going to give a bracha to Yosef, and he gives a bracha to Ephraim and Menashe. Mm-hmm. So I think Rashi there says, a father wants nothing more than his children should be matzliach. The biggest bracha you can give to Yosef is that his children will be successful. So the way you set it up already doesn't say it, the reality the way it should be said. That's something which you can get when a person has a longer term perspective. Will say to you, you will never later say, well, at least it was good for me when your children are suffering. You'll never say it was good for me because you'll say, but they're my children, it's bad for me. I wish I hadn't done it for me because look at my children. You don't have children yet, so you don't understand that relationship with a parent and a child. I can tell you, I have a shir on the Akedah, the Binding of Isaac. I was giving it for, 60 years. I gave it before I was married. We got married. We had our first child, a boy. That shir took on an entirely different meaning. What? Be commanded to sacrifice your son? And now I have a son. So I can sort of think myself into that position. It took on an entirely different meaning. So, if that can happen to the way you understand a passage in the Torah, it can happen to anything in life. As you grow, as you have new experiences, you achieve new positions in the world, things take on utterly different meanings. And to set up a question, X will be better for me, but Y will be better for my children, that way of saying it isn't realistic. It isn't realistic. Because later when you see that you sacrifice something for your children, you're not going to feel, well, it's only I sacrificed for them, for me. You'll feel you sacrificed yourself. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is an example of how, the long term is not accessible because you don't know what changes are ahead of you.
It's another thing that a person who's coming from a more challenging background, so since he had to overcome more things to to be where he is. So if you put him in a certain situation, there's a chance of you know, there's bad people that he could, I mean, not so bad, but there's challenging people that he could associate, or there's good people he could associate with. So it's very, he's not supposed to come over because he already went through this. But let's say you take someone who isn't coming from that, he's not coming, didn't go through those challenges, but you think that, you know, that he could learn something very beneficial there, and that outset of, you know, the way things are set up. But you're afraid that since he didn't go through it, maybe he'll connect with the challenging group. So
it's very dangerous. Let me give you a very simple analogy, and just to factor out all the emotional connections and all the personal connections. As a person who, we have a niece who has an infant. They start her swimming at 9 months. 9 months! They put her in the water and teach her how to swim. Okay, great. That's terrific. I couldn't believe it when I heard about it, but that's what they do. Now this girl, when she grows up, you know, by the time she's 5 or 6, she's going to be in the water like she's on the land. It's going to be absolutely natural to her. Now, there's a whirlpool, or there's some difficulty that has to be faced, right? If anybody's going to go, she's going to go. She's the one who feels strongest, most confident at home. She has the best skills, and she's least likely to get hurt. Quite right. On the other hand, someone who hasn't swum or just swum casually in pools and that's all, of course you wouldn't throw him into a whirlpool. He'll drown for sure. Or the chances of drowning are so great, even if there's something great to be gained, there's a treasure chest with gold bars at the bottom. But there's a very good chance that he's going to drown. So why would you do that? You would never dream of doing that. And the same thing is true here. Now, having said that, I think that there's another qualification here. This, what you're referring to, happens to us here in North America. Very often people become frum in college. And they either finish a degree or they go several years and they come. And there's a question of going back to finish the degree. And they say, look, I became frum in college, so I'm not going to become unfrum in college. I've been there, I know the challenges are, and I mastered them, and I know that I'm not in danger. And that may very well be true. And it may be necessary that you should earn a degree. There are people who must earn a degree, otherwise they never feel self-confident, they're always worried that they're never going to get ahead, and they can't learn either. So we do send them back to earn a degree. But I say to them, maybe you're right, and I'm inclined to think you are right, that you won't be hurt by going back to that environment. But one thing's for sure, you're not going to grow, because you're going to be using all your energy just to make sure you aren't hurt. You're going to be using all your energy defensively. Whereas if you were in a positive environment, you would grow. So don't think there's no sacrifice. There definitely is a sacrifice. You're at least sacrificing a great deal of further growth that you could have. But yes, you're not in danger of being tripped up and falling entirely. Yes, that's true. And it may be necessary that the person should do that. And people from all sides of the spectrum agree that sometimes it's right for a person to go to college. Yeah, every person has to ask his own shayla from his own das tov. But one should be very careful about that. But in the abstract circumstances where a person has not been tested in a certain type of test, would you take people off the street, give them a gun, and tell them to go shoot at the enemy in a war? Definitely not. Many people just panic. They'll be dangerous to the other people around them. You can't count on them to carry out their part in the attack. You don't do that. So why should we do it? Why should we do it here? It's very good when you think about these questions, transform them into questions about practical life that have nothing to do with Yiddishkeit, nothing to do with values, nothing to do with growth, just shooting bullets at enemies or drowning in the water, and the questions often become very, very easy and clear. And I think here is a good case of it. Now, of course, you don't expose a person to danger where he could really get hurt if he's never had any training in dealing with that danger.
Mm-hmm.